Alright, this should just be the last little part of estate duty. Where we left off, we looked at the abatement. We said it's 3.5 million per person, and we said it comes off before you multiply by 20% or 25%. And we then spoke about the issues that we have when there are multiple previous spouses or you have more than one spouse at a time. Okay, details found in section 4, cap A. Then we quickly look and see, well, who's liable for estate duty? The most obvious, easy example is just to say it's the beneficiary. So whoever gets the stuff from the estate, whether it be one or multiple people, they are liable for the estate duty. So if you get R1,000,000 from the estate, you're liable to have to pay whatever the estate duty is. If there are no beneficiaries, then the executor is required to pay it from the estate. Okay. Some things just to the process of how this is done. The total duty is generally paid by the executor and then recovered from the other people. So the executor will pay it in one go and then claim it back from whoever gets the assets. Just some things to think about here. This could be a slight problem if somebody gets given, let's say, a house and there's a estate duty that's payable on that house, but the only way you can pay it is to have to sell the house. So you do have to be careful when assets are distributed that there's enough cash as well, because if you're only distributing assets, you're going to have to figure out some way to either turn it into cash or you need to have enough cash to pay the estate duty that is due and liable. How it's split, because remember, this could go to multiple people. Let's say you have multiple children and you share it amongst them. What you do, each person is liable for what they get, okay, over the net value of the estate times by the estate duty payable. You split it based on what each person gets over the total value of the estate, just to make it fair. The last thing you need to think about is something called the successive death rebate. What happens here is that, let's say somebody leaves property to somebody else, and then this person dies, and like pretty quickly, and then also wants to give it to somebody else after that. The problem here is that you're going to have estate duty payable on something very, very quickly. Sounds terrible. Let's say father gives it to son, pays estate duty, son has it for a day, son dies, gives it to grandchild. Grandchild gets it, grandchild dies, gives it to somebody else. And in all these cases, you're going to have 20% being taken off each time. Now, obviously, that seems a bit harsh because once it happens 3 or 4 times, the asset's going to be worth nothing. So there is something in the first schedule that provides for a reduction of the value based on how long it's been since it was previously subject to estate duty. The good news, I'm not going to ask you about it this year. You just need to know it exists and you need to know where to find it. Okay, but you're not going to have to do the calculations as of now. And yeah, so that ends estate duty. The key things that you need to take from it, I'm going to go back and do a little bit of a recap. Just remember, it happens when you die. It happens at 20% or 25% on anything above 30 million. You need to remember that SA residents, worldwide assets, non-SA residents, only on South African property. So differentiate that from donations tax. Cool. You need to know this slide very well because it's one you're going to be using the most. The key thing, this is where the abatement slots in, the 3.5 million before the 20% multiplication. Know what type of assets go in. Know what type of assets are deemed to go in and their exclusions. The most obvious one is always the domestic life policies. All right. Know when you can reduce it by the premiums paid and by the interest as well. Those amounts will be given. Know what other things are deemed property. The most obvious ones, donations, mortis causes, or things what will only pass upon death. Okay. Know what kind of expenses are going to be allowed as deductions. Foreign debts are allowed, but only as they exceed foreign assets. Okay. Anything you leave to a PBO is going to be allowed. And yeah, some specific ones, some to look out for. Anything given to a spouse is always going to be allowed as a deduction. How you value them, it's always going to be what you sell it for, except if it wasn't sold and simply given over to somebody else, it'll be at fair market value at the date of death. not the date that it's given across. Any farm use 70% of the value, and unlisted shares are always at fair market value on the date of death, even if they were sold. They will be treated at fair market value. Something that you need to know exists, but you don't need to know how to value it. You need to remember the abatement of 3.5 million. You need to know where it slots in. You need to know who's liable for estate duty, how the process works, and how you split it amongst people. Okay, the last slide is about successive deaths. So if one person gets an asset that was subject to estate duty and they die within a certain amount of time, you can reduce the value of that. But the good news for this year, we don't need to know how to do it. Awesome. The last slide I left in by mistake, but it's just a quick recap of something that came earlier. So yeah, I hope that helps make sense of estate duty. We'll have a couple questions that I'll put up with videos so that you can see how it's done in practice, but I hope that the theory side of it makes some sense. Cool. Have a good day.